Yes, indeed. It is called Lothric, where the transitory lands of the Lords of Cinder converge. In venturing north, the pilgrims discover the truth of the old words. The fire fades, and the lords go without thrones.
It's quite a feat when you think about it. Dark Souls made dying in a game not only just okay, but somehow fun. For all intents and purposes, the Souls series represents a fundamental shift in modern games where difficulty is cool again, and death is not the end, but the beginning. You are expected to die. You are thrown into the meat grinder and given the tools to succeed, but only after you've been chewed up and spit out a few times will you successfully use those tools. Most people freely became masochists when Dark Souls arrived on the scene, much in part to its breakout from the obscurity Demon Souls enjoyed. Not long after the Souls series entered the fray, many games have cropped up in the wake of its popularity, often being referred to as Souls-like. While some enjoyed a mild success, the Souls franchise was still the place to be whenever the next one came around. Demon Souls was good, Dark Souls was great, but unfortunately Dark Souls 2 fell out of the hands of the man responsible for the series, Hidetake Miyazaki, and just didn't deliver quite the same experience. Luckily for pretty much everyone involved, Miyazaki was at the helm once more for Dark Souls 3, the game he proclaimed would be the one to cap the series. The question then became, will Dark Souls 3 deliver a masterful ending to a now storied franchise? Dark Souls 3 represents a distillation of lessons learned from just about every game that came before it, including the wildly well-received Bloodborne. There is a really good chance that if there is something you enjoyed most about any of those games, it made its way into Dark Souls 3. Similarly, if there was something you loathed from any of those games, it was likely left on the cutting room floor. Even for a jaded asshole like me, it's hard to fault Dark Souls 3 in any major way. Now that might make the rest of this review moot for some, but I'll try and be a bit more in-depth than that. Press the go button and you are treated to a phenomenal cutscene that gives you the bones of the story you'll be taking part in. You begin as usual, choosing your character and class, possibly even taking the time to make your character look almost like a passable human being in the process. For anyone who has enjoyed one or more of the Souls games, you'll know that your starting class really only determines the difficulty, or lack thereof, in the early game, as you'll be crafting your own brand of crazy that will work one way or another in the late game. From there, you're tossed into the world with little else, and start your journey. The basic story here is similar to the other games in the series, especially the original Dark Souls. You are essentially tasked with the usual challenge of kindling the flame or putting it out after generally hacking and slashing your way through several bigger, nastier individuals than yourself. Coincidentally, you are introduced to most of these adversaries in the epic opening cutscene, so you'll have a very vague idea of what you're up against. From there, most of the story is filled in the usual way of the franchise. You'll get tidbits from NPCs, things that you see around the world, and perhaps most directly, in the descriptions of items you collect. Some people, myself included, have found the plot delivery in the series to be a bit too hidden, a bit too obnoxious in its prideful Easter egg hunt. While this hasn't done a complete 180 from previous titles, Dark Souls 3 is the closest we've got to being served what I'd deem a reasonable level of plot. You don't necessarily have to do backflips to get a solid grasp on what's happening around you and why you're killing everything that moves. I'm going to give credit to Bloodborne for this one, as it was a step in the right direction from the games previous. Furthermore, the story that you are directly and indirectly given is rich and intriguing. This is the level of world detail and lore that we got in Dark Souls and Bloodborne, but missed out on in Dark Souls 2. While it doesn't answer every question the series has presented over the years, it certainly covers a lot of them, and honestly, a little mystery is always good for a story. I'm quite certain that fans will be picking Dark Souls 3 apart for a long while, cross-referencing things from the previous titles that they know and perhaps didn't previously know in order to unlock as many of the Souls franchise secrets as possible. For me, while I appreciate the level of world detail and lore put into the franchise, it leans a little too hard on the unknown to make it intriguing, but regardless of how I feel, it's still one of the best video game worlds ever created. Visually, Dark Souls 3 is beautiful. This is especially appreciated given what most games have to go through to run well on PC and consoles. The art style is unmistakably Dark Souls, and it's never looked better. Bloodborne really got me excited for what Dark Souls 3 could be graphically, and it definitely delivered. The level of detail is quite astonishing, especially in the character and enemy designs. It's almost a shame that you rarely get the chance to enjoy a lot of the work done up close, as you're usually too busy killing them or trying not to be killed by them. I played on the PC and it ran quite smoothly with no real issues. From those I've talked to who own it on consoles, it seems to hold up reasonably well without too many hitches. Generally, it runs about as well as Bloodborne did on the PS4, which is to say it's more than serviceable. Honestly, Dark Souls 3, while not being some sort of technical powerhouse, is one of the prettiest games I've played in a couple of years. For as pretty a game as Dark Souls 3 is, it would be far less impactful without the outstanding soundtrack throughout. The music has always been a strong point in the series, but I believe Dark Souls 3 wields by far the most masterful soundtrack of all. It grasps you from the starting screen to the ending credits with sweeping and haunting orchestral pieces that give depth and emotion to its world. Boss fights that are almost always great are often made phenomenal by the individual pieces that play to your success or failure. I can't think of a single way in which Dark Souls 3 could have been scored any more aptly or remarkably. I suppose ultimately the Dark Souls games are judged most harshly for their difficulty, their boss fights, and by proxy, their controls. The series has been a bit of a roller coaster in regard to pretty much all of these things. Demon's Souls was brutal in its toughness, its controls solid but at times unwieldy, and its bosses acceptably varied. Dark Souls was equal in toughness, though for different reasons than its predecessor, refined the controls but still needed more tweaking, and perhaps if you include the DLC, has the best bosses in the series. Dark Souls 2 was by and large an easier time even if you accounted for having experience should you have played Dark Souls. It was also arguably the most broken of the series, often resulting in needless frustration for the player, and unfortunately was home to the most one-note boss roster. As you might imagine, after having seen the progression across the series in other aspects, Dark Souls 3 goes a long way in making up for Dark Souls 2 and presents some of the best the series has to offer. Even with experience in your corner, Dark Souls 3 can be punishing, which is definitely welcomed. Unlike in Dark Souls 2, the difficulty isn't just in getting to the boss. Instead, there's a nice balance in difficulty from your point A to point B travels and bosses you'll face. The bosses are also properly varied, with few that can be beaten with the same tactics over and over. You are likely to be caught off guard most when bosses start changing their attack tempos, making your muscle memory far less useful. There is also a great deal of baked-in tactics that you can use to dismantle bosses, though they are rarely a necessity for ultimate victory. Honestly, what downsides there are to be found mechanically with Dark Souls 3 are arguably subjective at best. For myself, I have openly loathed the supposed purposeful inclusion of action queuing. If you don't know what I mean, let me give you an example. You're up against an enemy and you know from experience that once it starts a certain attack, you want to dodge twice consecutively and attack once. You begin your sequence and unfortunately, after a second roll, you don't quite get the timing right, and you are thrown to the ground by your enemy. After what can be a few seconds of recovery and your standing animation finishes, the game initiates your attack that you had originally wanted to use almost 5 seconds ago. Doing so, you leave yourself wide open unintentionally for another full-on hit from the enemy. In the case of a boss, many of them only require 2 hits before you're killed, and therein lies the issue. This is apparently intentional to reduce button mashing, though I feel that's a pretty bad argument for its inclusion. I can appreciate the need for something that resembles this system to make some of those super frame-tight timings work, but it's janky, and it results in many unearned deaths. Perhaps more frustrating is when the queue gets confused and adds an action you never pressed. The most common example I came across was when I would queue more than 2 attacks in a string before a roll. Instead of, say, 3 attacks in a roll, it would have me swing 4 times and then roll, or in rarer cases, swing 5 times and no roll at all, even with stamina to spare. This isn't something unique to Dark Souls 3, mind you. I've played and completed all 3 Souls games and Bloodborne, only having not played Demon's Souls, and I've experienced this in all of them. It's one of the few things that got to me when playing the games. Not everyone feels this way about the system, and so you can take my words with a grain of salt, but it was a source of more than one grain of salt for me personally. One part of the Souls series that has always seemed strange to me is the multiplayer. I never personally understood the necessity of such a thing beyond the summoning mechanic for bosses and general assistance. Invasions by players always ended up making my experience more grating than gratifying, and so I usually ended up playing offline altogether. As such, I'm not a particularly great judge for this feature, though I have friends who are deeply rooted in it. From what I've been told, Dark Souls 3 presents a more stable but still unbalanced experience for multiplayer. For better or worse, I feel this is representative of the balanced challenges presented when dealing with a game so built around single-player challenge. Regardless, if you were a fan in the past of the feature, it seems to be just as good or better in Dark Souls 3. You can essentially play through much of the game in a pseudo-cooperative nature, which again I imagine will please a number of people. If you're new to the series, I recommend trying the online play to see if it fits your preferred experience, as many people I know found it to make the game that much better. If you don't end up being a fan, you can always turn it off at any time, which is great. Dark Souls 3 is an honest, experienced conclusion to a loved franchise. It is a culmination of the best from each game that came before it, and that's about all you could really hope for. If you were hoping to have all of your questions openly answered come the end of the game, you may be disappointed, but somehow it's unlikely to surprise you either. There are things people have grown to expect in the Dark Souls series, and they are all here on display in all of their glory. You will be engrossed in its beautifully crafted, eerie world and drawn in by its haunting musical scores. You will be faced with many challenges and many questions, of which not all will be outwardly answered. You will die, you will overcome, then you'll die some more, and you'll love it because it's Dark Souls. You can dance if you want to, you can leave your friends behind. 'Cause your friends don't dance, and if they don't dance, then they're no friends of mine. That was a cool trick, did you see that? That was neat. I dodge rolled appropriately, I was out of the way, then I teleported back to her hand. That's cool! Man, she's gotta teach me that. And here Adam goes on an adventure, one most foul, in which he will have his butthole prodded aggressively by what is likely to be a skeleton-like enemy. Watch as the team of skeletons...
Tree. It hits a tree.
Good question.
Up! No!
Through a fucking crack in the ground? That's how you're gonna do me?
I mean, hey.
Ho! Okay, here we go. Sword did 11 more damage, really? Okay, I'll take your word for it. That's it. All attacks, 0 damage. That is the dream. Roll sideways, still get hit. Okay. Get over here. Poke in. Wow, really? Wow. That was some of the worst fucking luck. Oh my god. I can see how this run is going already. Amazing. Alright, oh nice, we staggered him. Get in there. Get in there for big damage. Yes! Oh, that was absolutely splendid. Splendid. So if you can hit him straight in the head, like dead on the middle, you can stagger him pretty quick with that. Now let's die instantaneously to this guy. I'm going in him. I'm going in. I fucked it. And it did like no damage. Oh, this looks cool, but I'm not liking it. No. No. Why would you try to attack 3 times? What part of that did you think were you gonna get 3 attacks? Ow. That's bad! I'm alive. Oh, no. No. Oh, that's a good time! That did, like, no damage! Go for it, baby. I have no idea what's oh, he's got a phase too. Of course he does. I don't know what's happening! Oh, that's bad. No. Heal. Dude, that's not cool. Oh, that's cool. That was cool. Power up. Big damage. Oh, fuck. Shit. No. Oh, thank God I healed. Oh, thank God I healed. Please don't cheese me. I want full health. I want full health. Oh, what a sick dodge. What a sick dodge. This is great!